I had just supervised a major installation in Spokane and was heading east on Interstate 90 to see an old friend, Alina Neely, who lived by Lake Coeur d'Alene in northern Idaho. It wasn't my first trip to the Pacific Northwest, but it was my first time visiting this part of Idaho, and I was looking forward to reconnecting with Alina. Alina and I served together many years ago at Cherry Point, North Carolina. I had met his wife and the first of his 3 children, dining at his home on many occasions. When he left, we promised to stay in touch, and over the years, we frequently exchanged cards and letters. It had been several months since I last heard from him, so when I told him I would be in Spokane, he invited me to visit. Following his directions, I parked in front of his charming wooden house, perched on a wooded bluff overlooking the stunning Lake Coeur d'Alene. As I pulled up, Alina emerged from the back of the house. We exchanged a hearty handshake and manly hugs. He looked older than I remembered, but he was as strong and spirited as ever. "How are you, old salt?" he asked, his voice filled with warmth. "Fair to middling," I replied with a grin. "How about you?" "I could complain, but it wouldn't do any good," he said with a laugh. "Come on in the back. I've got elk steaks on the grill and beer in the fridge." The smell of barbecue wafted through the air, and the mention of elk steaks made my mouth water. As we walked toward the back, I asked, "Where's your lovely wife?" Alina's expression turned somber as he handed me an ice-cold beer. "She passed away a few months ago," he said quietly. "Pancreatic cancer. By the time they caught it, it was too late." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said sincerely, thinking of the kind-hearted woman I had known. "I thought the world of Wendy." "Thanks," Alina replied, his voice tinged with sadness. "She was a damn good woman, the best. Are you dating again, or what?" I asked, trying to lighten the mood. He shook his head. "Nah," he said. "She made me promise to find someone after she died. But to be honest, I just couldn't do it. Once you've been married to the best, everything else pales by comparison." Alina dished up the elk steaks, and we dug in. I had never eaten elk before, so this was a real treat. The meat was tender and flavorful, a perfect complement to the scenic view of the lake. "How are you doing?" I asked between bites. "I'm doing well," he said. "At least I get to enjoy these views every day," he added, looking out at the lake. "Wendy and I fell in love with this place when we first saw it, so we decided to stay. The kids come a couple of times a year, and I get to spoil the grandkids." Alina paused, looking thoughtful. "You know, Wendy wasn't my first wife," he said. "No, I didn't know that," I replied, surprised. "I never told you about my first wife." "But if it hadn't been for her cheating on me, I never would have met Wendy," he said, a bittersweet smile crossing his face. His story took me aback, and I could see the depth of his emotions as he reminisced. Alina's journey had been filled with unexpected turns, but it had ultimately led him to a love that defined his life. As we continued to talk and enjoy the meal, I felt a profound sense of connection and gratitude for the enduring bond of friendship. "I don't know if I ever told you this, but I read your stories on Literotica. I thoroughly enjoyed them." "Thanks," I said, smiling. "It's just something I do as a hobby while I'm on the road, just for fun." "With a couple of them, you really poked the hornet's nest," he said, grinning. "To hell with the critics, that's what I say. You keep writing." "I'll write it," I promised. "Maybe you'd like to write a story about what happened to me and my first wife," he suggested. "Of course, I'd love to hear it," I said, pulling out an audio recorder. "Do you mind if I record this? I want to make sure I get it right." "Go ahead," he said, nodding. He began his tale as I placed the recorder on the table between us. Alina's story. "I enlisted in the Marine Corps right out of high school in 1974. It was either that or spending the rest of my life working in my father's hardware store. After boot camp, I ended up at MCS El Toro in California. That's where I met Ella. She was a year younger than me, and we hit it off right away. We dated for several months before I proposed to her. She agreed, and her father, a career Marine who served 3 tours in Vietnam, gave his blessing. We were married in a small religious ceremony and honeymooned in Las Vegas. I thought I had it made. Ella was a beautiful girl with all the right curves in all the right places. She had long, curly blonde hair that cascaded just above her shoulders, and she was an absolute beast in bed. That woman knew how to give a world-class blowjob. And yes, she swallowed. She was a bit of an exhibitionist too, which added an extra spark to our relationship. I'll never forget one night at the pool in our apartment complex in Anaheim. No one else was there, so she took off her bikini and tossed it to the side of the pool. The next thing I knew, she had spread her legs, showing off her freshly shaved pussy. Yes, she had shaved it just for me that night. I wasn't about to miss the opportunity. I took off my swimsuit and walked over to where she was, her breasts just peeking above the water. As I approached, she wrapped her legs around me, and we went at it like rabbits right there in the pool. When we finished and got out, I wrapped myself in a towel and grabbed my swimsuit. But Ella didn't bother with her bikini. She just strutted back to our apartment naked, completely unbothered by the possibility of being seen. Ella and I had an intense and passionate relationship, full of wild moments like that. But it wasn't meant to last. Over time, things started to unravel. It wasn't just the infidelity, it was the lies, the betrayal, and the realization that our connection was more about lust than love. One night, I came home early from a deployment and found her with another man in our bed. It shattered me. I confronted her, and it turned into a massive fight. She tried to justify it, saying I was gone too often, that she was lonely, but I couldn't see past the betrayal. I left her that night, and we divorced soon after. If it hadn't been for Ella cheating on me, I never would have met Wendy. Wendy was everything Ella wasn't: kind, loyal, loving. She healed the wounds Ella left behind and showed me what true love was. And for that, I will always be grateful. Alina's story was raw and heartfelt. As he finished, I could see the mixture of pain and relief on his face. The past had shaped him, but it was clear that Wendy had been his true north, the one who had brought him peace after the storm. She just grabbed her towel and bikini and went completely naked to our apartment, which was on the second floor, in another part of the complex. Hell, anyone could have seen her if they looked. When we got to the apartment, she stretched out on the bed and started masturbating for me, spreading her pussy lips wide. Hell, she didn't need an engraved invitation, so I dove in and ate her out until she had another orgasm. Then we shagged some more and finally fell asleep in the early morning. That was the way things were between us, and I thought I was the luckiest man in the world. About 6 months after we were married, I received orders to go to Okinawa for a 1-year unaccompanied mission. We cried a lot, but we managed. Since she was going to night classes to get her nursing degree while working, we decided to keep the apartment. I was getting an allowance from my paycheck to pay the rent, so she only had to worry about utilities, which weren't many. She had her own car and hated driving my van, so that wasn't a problem. We made love the night before I left and promised to be faithful to each other and write every day. I hated to leave like this, but I had no choice. After 10 months, we wrote to each other every day, hot, torrid letters. I loved receiving her letters, as she always perfumed them, and I always got hard reading what she said she wanted to do with me. About 6 weeks before I left Okinawa, Ella told me that her friend from school, Bridget, was going to San Francisco for a couple of weeks for vacation, and she asked if I could come along. I thought it wouldn't hurt, so I said yes, as long as Ella kept writing to me and kept me updated on how she was doing and where she was. She agreed and kept her promise for a while, but then the letters stopped coming. I kept writing, but received no reply. A week before my departure, I went to the USO and called our apartment, but there was no answer. So I called Bridget to find out what had happened. Bridget was about to head back east to join her boyfriend and told me that Ella had decided to stay a little longer in San Francisco to visit some friends from high school. She didn't know who they were and had no contact information. Heck, I didn't even know she had friends there. Then, the letters I was sending her to San Francisco started arriving back to me, unopened and labeled address unknown. What the hell? I asked myself. Where the hell was she? I started to panic, thinking maybe she had been kidnapped or worse. I called Ella's parents, who were in San Diego at the time, to see if they knew where she was. But they told me they hadn't heard from her in weeks. You have to remember that at that time, we didn't have cell phones or the internet or anything like that. They offered to pick me up at March Air Force Base when I got back if I didn't hear from Ella by then. I was worried sick imagining all sorts of terrible scenarios. My mind was racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As I thought about it, I realized there could be several reasons. Maybe she was on a bus back to Orange County, so I decided to wait until I got home, hoping that she was there. A day before I left, I called home again, but no one was answering the phone. So I called her parents and told them. They were not very happy with Ella, but agreed to pick me up and take me back to the apartment. True to their word, they met me in March and took me to the apartment. It was dark when we arrived, and I saw no light in the apartment windows. Her father helped me carry my things up to the apartment. I opened the door and walked in, expecting to find Ella. Instead, I found a dusty, lifeless apartment. Ella was a meticulous housekeeper, but everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, as if no one had been there for some time. Her father and I looked around, hoping to find clues, but there was nothing to indicate that she had been there recently. Most of her clothes were gone, as was almost all of her jewelry. Her father saw a pawn ticket on the dresser and handed it to me. I had no idea what she might have pawned, but I decided to call the store first thing in the morning. "Let me know if you hear anything," her father said as he started to leave. "If there's anything we can do, call." I thanked him and put my gear away. I searched but found nothing to indicate where she might have gone. I went down to the garage and saw that my truck was still there. Ella used to leave the car parked in a marked spot under an overhang, and it was still there. Where the hell is she? I wondered. I called the local police to report her missing, but they gave me the runaround. To hell with this, I thought, and went to bed. The next day, I got my first clues. I called the pawn shop number on the ticket her father found and learned that she had sold her wedding and engagement rings for $100. I was outraged. I had saved for those rings for months and had paid a bundle for them. The store offered to return them to me, but I refused. Enraged, I took the ring off and smashed it with a hammer. Later, while cleaning and picking up, I came across a stack of letters addressed to Ella from someone in San Francisco named AICHI. The letters dated 6 months before she told me about her trip. I couldn't believe she would leave me like this, but I had to know what was in the letters, so I started reading them. As you can imagine, they were as hot as the letters Ella and I wrote to each other. But I learned something else. Reading the letters, it became painfully clear that Ella and AICHI had known each other from high school and had been seeing each other the entire time we were married. They met up before her classes or during the afternoons when I was on duty at the base. One letter said, "I hope your stupid husband liked eating my cum out of your pussy last night." I thought I was going to puke reading that. But there was more. "Maybe I can get you pregnant and have your husband raise the child. Wouldn't that be cool?" Another letter taunted. Each letter enraged me more than the last. It became evident that Ella and AICHI had planned for her to stay with him in San Francisco all along. The trip with Bridget was just a cover, a ruse to make it look like she had simply disappeared. It was also clear she had finished her studies and was looking forward to getting a nursing job in San Francisco. She never told me she had finished her studies. That was part of her deceit. My anger didn't even begin to describe how I felt. I wondered how she could do this to me, to us. Despite many opportunities to cheat on her, I had always remained faithful. I called her parents and talked to her mother, Ginny. "Hi, Alina," she said. "Have you heard from Ella?" "Yes," I said. "She's living in San Francisco with some creep named AICHI." "AICHI? AICHI Calloway?" "Yes," I said. "Did you know that?" "No, I didn't know that, Alina," she said. "Ella and AICHI were a couple during high school, but I thought she cut him off when you started dating." "No," I said. "It seems she and AICHI have been cheating on me behind my back for our entire marriage. They've been planning this for a while." "My God, Alina," she said. "I'm so sorry. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to divorce her," I said. "I understand," she said. "Is there anything we can do?" "Yes," I said. "You can go upstairs and take her things. I don't want them. All I want is my clothes, my TV, tools, and my stereo. Your car is still here, too." "All right," Ginny said. "I'll talk to her brothers, and we'll go up and get her things this weekend." We ended the call, and I started looking for a lawyer in the phone book. Damn, There were so many out there, I didn't know where to start. I began calling and found one who could see me on Friday at the earliest. Friday, I thought. That was 3 days away. Mind you, that wasn't how I planned to spend my leave. But I had no choice. That's when I decided I had to find her and verify where she was. I looked through the letters Alex N. had sent her and got her address in San Francisco. I decided it was time for a road trip, so I checked my truck, grabbed a few things, and hit the road. I stopped at the bank and closed our accounts, taking everything in cash. Ella had already gone to the bank and taken almost half of what we had, but I still managed to take out a little over $3,500, which I thought would be enough to get me through this mess if I was careful. I also had money left over from my stay in Okinawa, which I figured would help me get over the hump. It took me about 8 hours to make the trip, battling traffic in Los Angeles and Orange counties. Upon arrival, I stopped at a motel and bought a small camera and a detailed map of the city and surrounding area. I studied the map and located the street and block that matched the address on Alex's letters. I decided to get something to eat and a few hours of sleep before doing any recon. I didn't plan to confront Ella, but I wanted to get a picture or two of them together to show her parents and my lawyer. Early the next morning, I drove to the area where Alexin lived and located the apartment complex where he and Ella were staying. I parked about 100 feet from the front door and watched. I put on a ratty old baseball cap and sunglasses, hoping that would provide enough camouflage. It didn't take long to spot the two cheaters. Alexin and Ella were out the door and headed for a red Mustang convertible. Alexin was wearing shorts and a t-shirt, while Ella was wearing a summer dress. I grabbed the camera I had with me and snapped a couple of pictures. From the way they were dressed, I figured it wouldn't be long before they left, so I waited. When they returned, I took note of his badge. Alexin and Ella got out of the car, and Alexin opened Ella's door. He wrapped his arms around her as she got out and kissed her deeply. As they kissed, he lifted the back of her dress above her waist, revealing that she wasn't wearing any panties. She pressed her crotch against his as they continued kissing. She then looked around for a second and pulled her dress off over her head, tossing it on the front seat of the car. Alexin kissed her naked body and licked her pussy as she leaned against the car door, spreading her legs. I was taking pictures of the whole encounter, thinking they would make good evidence for my divorce. She took her hand to the zip of his shorts, and I thought she was going to bang him right there. It took everything I had not to pounce on them and beat the shit out of them right there. I sat there, boiling with rage, my heart pounding in my chest. Watching Ella with Alexin was like a dagger to the heart, each moment twisting deeper. But I knew I needed this evidence. I needed to stay calm and collected for the sake of the divorce proceedings. As much as I wanted to confront them, I had to think strategically. So I continued to watch, continued to document, all while my anger simmered, waiting for the moment when I could finally set things right. After a few minutes, Ella pulled Alexin back, and I heard him tell her to take her back to the flat and screw her. Ella remained naked as they went through the gate and headed for her apartment. I waited a bit to see which apartment they were going to and noticed that there were no windows in the apartment from which they could see Alexin's car. I waited a little longer and realized I needed to pee urgently. I had a perverse idea and walked to Alexin's car and peed all over Ella's dress, making sure no one saw me. Then I felt the urge to shit, so I did the only logical thing. Making sure no one saw me, I pulled down my shorts and took a shit all over her dress, making sure to cover as much of the inside of Alexin's car as I could. Believe me, I didn't want to do that to a beautiful car like theirs, but I decided to screw it. If they were going to shit on my marriage, it was the least I could do in return. I also knew I ran the risk of someone seeing me and telling Alexin, but at that point, I didn't care. I wiped my ass with a towel Alexin had in the car, then quickly pulled up my pants and ran to my truck. I had all the evidence I needed, so I drove away quietly. After leaving the motel, I headed back to Orange County. I stopped at one of those quick photo places to develop the film, and 2 hours later, I had the photos and negatives in hand. I had just enough time to get a few hours of sleep, so I went out for a while, showered, and shaved for my appointment with the lawyer. The rage and betrayal still burned inside me, but at least I had some form of justice in my hands. As I prepared for the meeting with my lawyer, I knew this was just the beginning of reclaiming my life from the wreckage Ella had left behind. I grabbed the photos, the pawn ticket, and Alexand's letters and was on my way again. That's when I learned that California was a no-fault divorce state. It didn't matter that she walked out on the marriage, sold her rings, and cheated on me the entire time we were married. Everything would be split 50-50. The lawyer asked me how much we had in the bank, and I told him the truth: nothing. I also mentioned that Ella had already taken half of what we had. Besides, I added, she was earning more than me, even though she was only working part-time and now had a nursing certificate. I showed him one of her pay stubs, which revealed that her take-home pay was almost double what I was making before taxes. He warned me not to try to hide anything, and I explained that I had just returned from a year-long assignment in Okinawa and was headed for the East Coast, so I couldn't drop everything and run to court. He assured me that the law provided for this and that I would not have to appear in court in person. I gave him the address where Ella and her lover lived and suggested that she be served there. The lawyer took down all the information and said that papers would be drawn up and she would be served in a few days. If all went well, he said, I would be a free man in 6 months. The relief I felt was immense, even if it was tempered by the anger and betrayal still simmering inside me. Driving away from the lawyer's office, I reflected on how unfair it felt that Ella would get away with so much. But I knew that dwelling on it wouldn't change anything. My focus had to be on moving forward and starting fresh. I had the evidence, the legal process was in motion, and soon enough, this chapter of my life would be closed for good. As I prepared for the journey ahead, I resolved to rebuild my life stronger and wiser, leaving the past behind where it belonged. He gave me his card and asked me to call him when I had a good mailing address in North Carolina. I gave him a cash advance and left. When I got home, I went to the apartment management office and told them I planned to leave Monday morning. I then scheduled the utilities to be shut off and set about packing and cleaning. When Ella's family arrived Saturday morning, they emptied the house and took Ella's car to San Diego. "What's wrong?" her father asked before he left. I pulled out the pictures I had taken and Alexand's letters and showed them to him. His face went white. "That stupid one," he said. "I'm so sorry, Alina. I thought I raised her better than this." "You didn't do anything to hurt them, did you?" he asked. "No," I said. "I wanted to kick the bastard in the balls, but I didn't. I figured she wasn't worth going to jail for. No offense intended, but I did do some work on his car." He looked at me funny. "What do you mean?" he asked. I told him I had pissed and shit on his car and Ella's dress. He laughed. "It seemed like the right thing to do at the time," I told him. He smiled and offered me his hand. "Stay in touch, Alina," he said. "You'll always be welcome in our home." "Thank you," I said. Finished for the day, I went out for a beer and a burger, then came home and tinkered on the floor since everything else was gone. That Sunday, I finished cleaning the house and loaded up my truck. I didn't have much, just my clothes, my TV, the stereo I bought in Okinawa, and my tools. When I had everything securely fastened, I put the top on the truck bed. One more night in the apartment, and I left the next day, after collecting the bond and cleaning deposit. I still had some time left, so I stopped to visit my parents in Texas for a few days, and then went to Cherry Point, North Carolina. When I arrived, I still had over $2,500 in cash, plus the check for the apartment, so I opened a new credit union account and moved into the barracks. A few months later, the lawyer informed me that the divorce was final. Apparently, Ella decided not to contest anything and didn't even ask for child support. The relief washed over me. Finally, the nightmare was officially over. With the weight of the divorce lifted, I focused on building my new life. I made new friends, found solace in my work, and slowly but surely began to heal. The betrayal still stung, but I knew that time would dull the pain. Each day brought a little more clarity and a little more peace, and I was determined to make the most of my fresh start. That night, I celebrated at a bar in town, and that's when I met Wendy. She was drinking alone, so I offered to buy her a drink, and she accepted. We started talking, and it turned out she had just left her boyfriend, whom she had caught with another girl. We were both a little shy and took it slow, but after a few months of dating, we fell in love with each other. One night, as we danced, she cornered me. "Do you like to eat pussy?" she whispered in my ear. At first, I thought maybe she was drunk. "As a matter of fact, yes," I replied. "Then take me home and show me," she said, handing me her panties. "Now, Alina," she commanded. "Yes, ma'am," I said, walking her to my truck. She climbed in and began unbuttoning her blouse. By the time I got in the truck, she had already removed her blouse and bra and was rubbing her breasts, tugging at her nipples. She smiled and spread her legs to show me her wet pussy. I wasted no time driving her home. We made passionate love for hours. When we finished, she raised herself up on one elbow and looked into my eyes. "You know, I'm strictly a one-man woman," she said, "and I'm not going to tolerate cheating." "I'm strictly a one-woman man," I told her, "and I just got divorced from a woman who cheated on me." She smiled and hugged me. "Good," she said, kissing me deeply. That night I proposed to her, and she accepted. We were married in the base chapel a few months later, and the rest is history. "So, Alina," I asked, "did you ever see your ex-wife after that?" He looked at me and took a sip of his beer. "As a matter of fact, I did," he said. His father retired from the Corps about 10 years later and was opening a gun shop. He invited Wendy and me to celebrate with him and his family, so we did. I was stationed at Camp Pendleton, so we weren't too far away. By then, we had 3 kids, so we hopped in the SUV and headed that way. He took another sip of beer. "She was there alone. Turns out she caught Alexon cheating on her with another woman," he said. "She looked awful. I think she must have put on about 100 pounds since I last saw her. She saw us together and freaked out. Ella's face went pale when she saw Wendy and me with our kids. She tried to approach us, but I simply turned away, holding Wendy's hand a little tighter. Her father came over later to apologize for her behavior. She made her choices, Alina," he said, shaking his head, "and now she's living with the consequences." We stayed for the celebration, catching up with old friends and making new memories. It was a bittersweet moment, knowing how far I'd come since those painful days of betrayal. Wendy and I shared a knowing look, silently reaffirming our love and commitment to each other. As the evening drew to a close, we packed up the kids and headed back to our new life, leaving the past firmly behind us. The drive home was filled with laughter and the comforting sounds of our children, a stark contrast to the turmoil that once filled my life. I knew then that I had truly moved on and that the best was yet to come. I introduced Ella to Wendy and the kids, and I thought she was going to burst into tears. Then I leaned over to her and asked, "Did Alexon manage to clean all that crap out of his car?" She smiled and took a sip of her beer. "I thought she was going to go crazy," she said. "Was it you who did that?" she asked me. I told her I'm not going to say anything and left. "Did she ever apologize to you or explain why she did it?" I asked him. He shook his head. "No," he said. "She never apologized, and I really didn't want to hear her bullshit excuse. Besides, what was done, and no words from her would change that." He handed me a picture of him and Wendy with their children. "However, something good came out of all that," he said. "What's that?" I asked. "If Ella hadn't cheated on me, I would never have met Wendy, and those 3 precious children would never have been born," he said. "Looks like 4 good things to me," I told him. He thought about it for a moment, smiled, and touched my beer bottle with his. "4 good things indeed," he said, "and let's not forget 6 beautiful grandchildren and counting." As we clinked our bottles together, the weight of the past seemed to lift a little more. The bitterness and betrayal had been transformed into something far more valuable, a life filled with love, laughter, and family. Wendy and I watched our kids play, their joyous shouts filling the air, and I couldn't help but feel grateful for the twists and turns that had led us to this moment. Later that night, as Wendy and I tucked our children into bed, we talked about how far we'd come and the future we looked forward to. We knew that the road hadn't been easy, but it had brought us together, and for that, we were endlessly thankful. In the end, the painful chapters of my past had paved the way for a story of love and redemption, a story that was still unfolding with every new day.